single-digit inflation?
For me, I'm really caught. I don't even know what to say, because sometimes Nigeria's problems are just too many, and if you're just thinking of it, you don't even know where to begin from. Inflation, I don't think we should even be celebrating a deceleration of inflation figures at 32%, because if you even take the month-on-month decrease, for example, from my own mathematics, if you say, okay, let's even be reducing the way we are reducing month on month, it will take us like another 1 year or 1 year and a half to even get to the 15% that you're talking about. Before that 1 year and a half, people go don't die finish. Businesses go don't crumble. You understand? I was reading, was it over the weekend, or was it when I was even in Geneva, that a lot of companies are closing down. Companies that are not also closing down, businesses are raising their product prices by over 70% to be able to preserve their margins. And what that means is that a lot of people, their purchasing power have been eroded. Inflation has, people are really going for essentials now. And the essentials are really like food, transport, school fees for their children, rent, which I will come to later in the core inflation also. It's also driving that part, even though we're seeing a deceleration. So where does it really leave all of this, in terms of inflation outlook? If we say the way we are going now, we are going slow, even lesser than a snail, as it were. Okay. Where would we be in the next 1 year and a half?
So I think in the next 1.5 years, it is possible for us to be around 20% level.
Which is not good.
If we take a look at, it is not good, but I reckon that this is a conservative view, and a much bullish view will be for me to expect inflation of around 15 to 8%, on a bullish note. So on a conservative note, I think we could be around 20% level. And if we take a look at two African countries, which we track Ghana, we track Egypt. Let me start from Ghana. Ghana at some point about 2 years ago, had an inflation rate of about 50-something%. But as we speak, their inflation rate is about 20-something%, below 30%. At some point, Egypt, sometime last year, was around 34% inflation rate. As we speak, Egypt is around 20-something level, 25, 26 or thereabouts. So, which means that we are not the only country suffering from high inflation in Africa. But although the causes or the drivers might be different, the reality is that we are also seeing our own part of the pressure, and I reckon that the outlook is conservatively positive.
Now, you just brought me to a place I also wanted to take this interview to, which is listening to the Minister of Agriculture, Senator Kyari. I don't know if you also saw the news that 50 kg bag of rice will now be sold to non-civil servants at 40,000 naira, where we're seeing price of 50 kg rice over like 90,000 naira now. When I was reading what the Minister of Agriculture said, he said that, of course, COVID-19 pandemic, perhaps the remnants are still there, Russia-Ukraine war, as well as our local economic challenges are impacting why we're seeing a food crisis in Nigeria. Do you agree with the Minister of Agriculture on that? Because we've seen that food inflation has really impacted headline inflation. The price of bread, yam, grains, other commodities, palm oil and co have been on the increase, which is also pushing headline inflation. So do you agree with the Minister of Agriculture that COVID-19 pandemic, the remnants are still here, and that is why we're suffering a food crisis and local economic challenges?
So I have my personal view, and my personal view around food inflation is that we have not been able to produce as much as we should to feed ourselves as a nation, and the fact that our agriculture is still, largely speaking, not on a commercial scale in terms of the size that we should have. It is just individuals that are doing farming, or families that are doing farming in food producing states that are, largely speaking, involved in agriculture. Then those, few farmers are also being attacked, by gunmen. That, to my mind, speaks to, insecurity, and that is largely speaking because of the inflation, we are seeing. Some authorities may link it to the remnant impact of, COVID-19, but I reckon that insecurity is more of the major driver. And if you add that to, periodic floods, that we have in food-producing states or regions, you will agree with me that, those are some of the issues that, should be addressed. In terms of policy response, I noticed that the government, has deployed about, 10,000 plus agro rangers to food producing states to ensure an improvement in security. I think, we should watch out to see, how that, plays out, because security has to improve. Otherwise, we will have to fill the demand supply gap in terms of food with importing from, other countries. And when we do that, we automatically import inflation from those, neighboring countries. So to my mind, it is more of, lower output because of, insecurity, because of, flood events, and not so much of, COVID-19. If we really want to track what, food players are giving us in terms of market updates. As we speak, for instance, we have rice prices rising in the market. And, those that will benefit from the government, lower price of rice are very few. So which means the large portion of the population will still be feeling the impact of elevated, prices of rice. The same thing applies to beef. And the only thing that seems to be coming down as we speak are tomatoes. And, pepper prices, which I reckon is because of, higher harvest, higher output, which is really what we need.
And rice it's a food, or it's a commodity that we can actually also be self-sufficient in. At the time we were told of rice pyramids across the country and all of that, where are those even rice pyramids? And even though the minister said that 30,000 metric tons of rice or so will be released. But let's go into another version, which is core inflation, and that is where rent is, because looking at the data, core inflation came out at 27.58%. Of course, core inflation excludes food and energy. The highest increases were recorded in rent as well as transport by bus and co. How dangerous is this really? Because I mentioned earlier, Nigerians spent 3/4, at least the last living standard survey that we're going in 2020 showed us that Nigerians spent 3/4 of their income on food. Now, I don't know, another one has not been done. I guess if another one has been done, it could even be worse than that, because inflation wasn't at 30-something% when they did it. So we would say, okay, food and rent right now are essential services. How dangerous is this core inflation, even at 27%? Because a lot of Nigerians are complaining that their landlords and landladies have increased rents.
So I think, rent is not even the only thing that has increased. Children are just back to school, this new session. And, on average, it looks like we have seen well over 70% increase in school fees, across at least some states, some schools in Lagos. So when you talk about rent, it is just, the landlord, considering what will their income be, and how much can their income finance their needs if they should maintain the same rates. And that, largely speaking, in my view, is an indication of the reason that they increase, their rent, because the value of the rent they were collecting last year in dollar terms is not the same as the value of the rent they are collecting this year. Bear in mind also that, when they collect the same or lower value, they cannot purchase what they were, purchasing before with the same, old rent. I have just spoken about, school fees going
Sorry,
up.
let me come in here because we have just a few minutes. I understand where you're going to, but the people that they also want to collect rents from, their salaries have not increased as it were. Forget the minimum wage stuff. The minimum wage, even now we're hearing that the minimum wage has still not been paid. But if you take a look at even the index, if you gauge it the way, the percentage points by which the minimum wage has increased and what rents is costing now, is not even the same. I hope you understand what I mean. So you see people moving to other places that perhaps they can afford, or even you see people even moving to rural areas now.
I get you, but it is a matter of demand and supply. Yeah, because if you want to live in the cities, you want to live in areas where you have, high population, where you have, businesses, where the area is very busy, I think you will just have to be ready to pay the rent. Otherwise, there are very interesting considerations around, moving to less, populated areas, where rent is much cheaper. And I think, that will largely speaking be dependent on where do you work. So if you work far away from where you live, you will still feel the impact of inflation via transportation costs. So all these elements, they just speak to what the government has to address in terms of ensuring that we have an improvement in our infrastructure so that the cost of doing business is much lower. The cost of transportation cannot go lower if we have, PMS prices at current level. Okay. And also with it going higher in the near term.
Okay, 2 more questions before we go. Now, and let me link it to what we've just said. If we take a look at states that are very expensive to stay in now, according to the NBS, and if we have that card, we can put it back on air. Bauchi State, Kebbi, Abia, or your Lagos. Lagos is actually number 8 on the list. You're seeing a lot of northern states as being the most costly states to be in. I don't know if you saw that. What does that data actually tell you? Because these are states that are also supposed to be within food belts, as it were, and they are the most expensive, costly states to live in. Bauchi, Kebbi, Jigawa, Sokoto, Yobe, Niger, Gombe. You're only seeing Oyo and Lagos as the southwest states there, then Abia as the south is the top 10. Of course, perhaps in the coming days, we'll do the 36 or 37 states for you. But what does it really say? And that also links me to what we're talking about. Because of high inflation now, do you think that people will begin to move closer to the rural areas? And then let's also link it that rural inflation is at 29.95%, which is also still high, but compared to urban inflation at 34.58%. Then the second question is, what's your outlook for MPC meeting next week? Is Cardoso and his team that perhaps the appointments last year, I think just about a year old now, do you think they will hike or they would hold? I don't know if I'll talk to you next week, but just give me an indication of what you think.
Okay, so let me start with the states with high inflation number. I think what is happening in those states is an indication of a slower growth rate of output, and when your output is reducing and you are also taking what is produced in that state to the
when you take a decision that you know personally that it's going to pitch on people and rattle them to react, you must get reactions.
True federalism. For once, if you do that today, most of these agitations will just go down because people are feeling oppressed.